Welcome to a special episode of the Insight in 15, KPMG's flagship podcast for business leaders. I'm Stuart Burt, and today we're going to do something slightly different. We're not in the studio. Instead, for the last few days, I've joined hundreds of business leaders and campaigners here in Liverpool for the Labour Party conference. Now, one of those people also at the conference is our guest today, James Nation, former Deputy Head of the Number 10 Policy Unit and Senior Advisor to Rishi Sunak, both as Prime Minister and Chancellor of the Exchequer, and now Managing Director at Fortnight Advisors. Together, we're going to dissect events of the last few days and what it means for business. James, thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Stuart. Good to be here with you.
Brilliant. So we are recording this on Tuesday morning, so just before the Prime Minister's big speech. We've got 15 minutes to distill the first 2.5 days of conference, so let's get started now. James, you and I have been to plenty of party conferences before. I'm slightly ashamed to admit this is, I think, number 30 of individual conferences I've been to. But for those less familiar, party conference season is effectively a 3-week period in which the political parties set out the priorities through speeches, announcements, and plenty of fringe events too. Why should businesses be listening to what's happening at these conferences?
So thanks, Stuart. I think the best way to describe it is there's sort of a nice informality to conference. The way to think about it is it's an opportunity for political parties basically to get the family together and to come to one location, talk and address the faithful, but also be in the same place and to share ideas and to engage with external stakeholders as well. And when you're the governing party, as Labour are now, it's a chance to engage with them without the civil service around, without going through the sort of formal departmental channels. And so it proves quite a good informal opportunity, I think, to see ministers and their advisors perhaps a bit more relaxed and a bit more willing to kind of engage a little bit more informally, which can free up some interesting conversations when we all get back to Westminster. But it's worth reflecting, I think, that first point that I made. It's really a chance for the political families to get together. So there's that element of it as well. And so quite a good opportunity for businesses and whichever party, in this case, Labour, to talk to each other directly and to understand them on their own terms away and out of the Westminster bubble.
Yeah. And so you were at the heart of policymaking in Number 10 and at the Treasury. And so when you were in government, what did you then see as the value of party conference on the other side? So not the internal politics in the party, but actually engaging with business and growth policy as well.
So I'll be totally honest with you, Stuart. Conference when I was in Number 10 was an absolute nightmare. I spent most of my time in hotel rooms, negotiating policy announcements, signing off Secretary of State speeches. So actually, I'll say that to people just to keep in mind, when you do catch a senior advisor to the Prime Minister or even the Chancellor, keep in mind these people are working as well as doing all of the socialising, bag carrying for ministers, etc. So it's worth just respecting that, which goes back to the informality that I said earlier. But certainly when I was at party conference, when I was special advisor to the Chancellor in particular, it was an invaluable opportunity to just, as I say, have those informal meetings, gatherings, chats with public affairs professionals or with business leaders. And it just allowed me to keep a register of things that I would not really get the time to sort of get my head over if I was just absorbed in the day-to-day in Westminster. So particularly that business day, which many people listening to this, I'm sure, will have been at, was a real opportunity to kind of prioritise that external engagement as a special advisor, which you never do enough of when you're caught up in the Westminster hurly-burly, as I say.
And I guess it is about then just picking up. It's less about the policy announcements, more about the general tone and vibe of business leaders particularly. What have you picked up from your conversations with business leaders here in Liverpool for this conference?
Well, it feels in one sense, I know it's Labour Party conference, but it does remind me actually of, various Tory party conferences that I did, not least because it's the governing party's conference. So there is just a certain feel and a vibe to that Stuart. And I think, what we're picking up is basically, I think a lot of attention is focusing on the forthcoming budget on the 26th of November, a sense that is a massive moment for the government, a sense as well, though, in fairness, that they are trying to listen. I think we all accept there is a difficult circle to square or black hole to fill, if you like. But I think there is a sense that, there is also a willingness still for some quite new ministers, given the recent reshuffle as well, to listen and to build some of those relationships. But the atmosphere is very much what you'd expect for a governing party. And also, I think it's fair to say what you'd expect from a governing party that, faces quite a challenging political outlook as well. So that's been my impression so far, a willingness to have a dialogue, a willingness to listen, but some big kind of policy and political uncertainty around, it's fair to say.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I mean, what I've been picking up is from business leaders, we actually have heard a lot from government about plans over the next 10 years, industrial strategy, trade strategy, infrastructure strategy, small business strategy, so on and so forth. What we need to focus on now is delivery. And that's both quick wins within the next 12 months, but it's also about pushing ahead with implementing those plans that are all about strengthening UK growth over the next 10 years as well. So just if that's the general vibe, let's get into a couple of the specifics of the announcements and speeches. What stood out for you policy-wise over the last couple of days?
So policy-wise for me, I actually was listening to the Chancellor's speech yesterday and I heard her list off various infrastructure projects talking about a youth guarantee. And not to be cheeky, Stuart, but I did just think a lot of this sounds familiar. And it sounds familiar because many of these projects have been touted for quite some time. And I think it comes back to the point you just made, which is now the key is going to be delivery. And I think the real message from this government to business leaders listening to this is we are trying to buy ourselves the time and space politically, basically to say to our own party and others, calm down. But that relies on actually getting on with these, headline projects or whatever else. So it was interesting to hear the Chancellor list those. Let's see the shovels get in the ground, or let's see what the actual plans for the youth guarantee is, for instance. You've kind of had two buckets of policy, I would say, Stuart. You've had the bucket of policy, which is traditional growth announcements, of which I've just mentioned a few. And then you've had some that are a bit more harder edged on the immigration side. And I think we've got to mention it. That's because, the Labour government here and Labour ministers here will be acutely aware of the reform threat and also the salience of immigration as well with the British public. So that's why you've seen announcements like today's, a visa on foreign students a visa fee levied on foreign students to fund, the restoration of maintenance grants for poorer British students going to universities. That kind of or those kind of policies designed more for that reform-facing flank. So they're trying to do two, not wholly unrelated, but different things. And that's where some of the trade-offs will come in as well, and those difficult judgments around growth ahead of the budget, Stuart.
Great. And if you're the Prime Minister, that's the next big speech. And at the risk of this going out after this speech and recording before, what do you think is the message that they would hope to land later today?
So I think two things I'm going to be looking out for. One, it just builds on what I was saying, framing for the next general election. Now, I can't believe we're talking about that yet, Stuart, but everyone is. And even though the election is not really, I think Starmer only legally has to call it by August 2029, the framing for it starts now. And I think, that contrast between him and Labour and Farage and Reform will be key to the speech. And I think on the substance, let's just watch for a lot of detail on the NHS. I think that is an area in particular where the Labour Party feels on safer ground, maybe a feeling that Wes Streeting so far as Health Secretary, obviously he kept his job, has done well so far in gripping the waiting list challenge. No Labour government gets re-elected without being seen to grip and have a real hold on the performance of the NHS. And I think they know that's an area that could play well with them. So I'd expect that to, when we're talking about policy substance, to be quite key and core to what we hear from the Prime Minister shortly.
And what about message to wider business, but also global investors? Because in the one sense, yes, the Chancellor and the Prime Minister were talking to their own party, they were talking to people in the hall, their own MPs and supporters. But in another, if we think about the Chancellor's speech, it was also a signal, I would say, to global investors about the UK's commitment to fiscal rules and economic stability. There was talk again about this securonomics term, which is effectively around economic security. What do you think the message they want to land is for that audience?
Absolutely. I think there will still be the UK is open for business, here to attract FDI in key strategic sectors. We've set out an industrial strategy. We've set out longer term capital budgets for 10 years. In line with what you were saying earlier, we remain very committed to those fiscal rules. And, in relation to that, I think if you're an investor, you are looking at some of the hard messaging which the Prime Minister and the Chancellor yesterday had for their own side, to your point, Stuart, around the need for further welfare cuts, for example, and really justifying the need to stick to those fiscal rules. Of course, let's see. There has been, a fair amount of policy turbulence, as people will know, in the UK this year. But I think, it will just be a reminder to say that, the UK, the fundamentals in the UK remain stable. And also, I think if you're Starmer, you'll be touting achievements like, for example, the US trade deal as an indication of what the UK is able to do, standing apart from these various trade blocs. So I think that's where I'd expect him to major today.
Great. And party conferences will come and go, and we'll have a sudden rush of people going to get their trains after the Prime Minister's speech. But I want to look ahead now to the rest of this year and what is shaping up to be a busy autumn in UK politics. What do you think everything that we've discussed so far in terms of the conference mood tells us about how the rest of the year will play out on policy in Westminster?
So I think the first thing to say is I mentioned that the Prime Minister and the Chancellor are having to face both ways, and I think that will continue. In fact, three ways. That you've got the message to external investors, which we've just rehearsed. You've then got the message more on the social side, facing reform and what they are doing in terms of gaining support in the polls, etc. And then you've got that messaging to their own party. With some of the announcements or the language or the rhetoric that we've seen from ministers in this conference so far, really to play to the Labour faithful. And that kind of, three-way face is going to continue throughout this year, Stuart, and it's going to be particularly worth watching around the time of the budget. We don't know yet, and it is almost pointless to speculate on the extent to which Rachel Reeves is going to have to put taxes up in the forthcoming budget. We have a good idea, but there hasn't been an OBR forecast presented to her in private yet. That will come on Friday. But we do know it's probably going to be a tough ask. And in coming through with that policy package, she is going to have to be acutely aware of all of those three cohorts that I've described. And then beyond the budget, I suppose the question for her and the Prime Minister is, once you've got through it, can you buy yourself a bit of time, hopefully for some underlying news in the economy to maybe go more of your way? And we've seen, for instance, something that we've written about at Forefront that's been reported on is that, and I think the Chancellor said this yesterday, she wants to move to one OBR forecast per annum, which of course is terrible for people like me, Stuart, who love, writing on this every few months, but probably good, I think, to your listeners for policy stability in the UK, because it means we won't be coming back to do this again in the spring. We'll have a budget, which the Chancellor will take some tough decisions to get through. It's going to be very difficult, but then there will be a gap then, hopefully, for things to settle a bit. And that's obviously ahead of some big moments in the political calendar, like the local elections in May next year.
Great. You say it's, and I tend to agree, it's pretty futile to talk about speculation, but it doesn't stop us from doing that anyway. So I'm going to do a quick fire round, if you don't mind, of some of the measures that have come up in the press and speculation, and just a brief answer of whether you think there's something in it. So firstly, an increase in the rate of income tax, VAT or national insurance, the main rates.
I don't think they go there. That is to breach the manifesto is huge. Famous last words. But I think they may look at things around broadening the base. And obviously we're seeing reporting around freezing or continuing the freeze in the income tax thresholds. But I just think breaching the manifesto by increasing the rates you've said you're not going to increase, really, really difficult to see that. But, ultimately this is going to be dictated by the size of the consolidation that Rachel Reeves needs to do.
A wealth tax or changes to capital gains tax?
Two very different things, probably changes to capital gains, although they've got to be careful because, as your listeners will know, the rate is currently at the revenue maximising level. So you can do something around allowances, perhaps on the CGT side, I'd expect to see that. Wealth tax, no. There's a good reason why very few countries do this abroad or have U-turned on it recently. And I don't think the Chancellor wants to go there, but she will need some taxes on the wealthy to appeal to Labour's base, like I said earlier.
Okay, we're almost out of time, so one more. Stamp duty changes.
I think if they can find the money, they might do a small stamp duty cut funded by an increase in higher value properties. But let's see if they've got the change. I just think there'll be a budget rabbit, Stuart.
Okay, interesting. And finally, our question that we ask everyone at the end, which is, if you have one message for business leaders based on what's been happening this week, what would it be?
Keep government focused on the fundamentals and work with them on delivery. I think that's the key thing. Just see it in their terms that they see this as quite a long stretch. The politics is the politics, big battle with reform, but really it's about just getting head down and getting on with those delivery plans, across policy. Great.
James, thank you very much. Pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Stuart.
On the podcast. For those watching or listening on the podcast, as ever, please do like and subscribe on all the major platforms, and we'll see you again for the Insight.